The thunderous sound of fists pounding on wooden tables silenced the crowded saloon as Delia Rose was shoved onto the makeshift auction platform. Her tear-streaked face, illuminated by the harsh lamplight in Silverwood Creek, Montana Territory, 1878. $500 for the prettiest gal in the territory, plus her daddy's land and 300 head of cattle, bellowed Augustus Thornton, the town's self-appointed businessman, who had orchestrated this travesty after Delia's father had died, leaving substantial debts. "Who'll start the bidding?" Delia trembled, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders despite the stifling heat of the packed saloon. Just 20 years old, she'd been reduced to property, auctioned off like livestock along with her inheritance. 3 days ago, she had been the daughter of respected rancher Thomas Rose. Now she was merchandise. The crowd of men, mostly miners, gamblers, and ranch hands, leaned forward eagerly. A few of the town's wealthy businessmen sat at tables near the front, cigars dangling from smirking lips, eyeing her as one might examine a prized mare. 600, called out Edgar Simmons, a local banker whose wife had died the previous winter. 700, countered William Hastings, a cattle baron who already owned half the valley and clearly wanted the rest. The bids climbed higher, the men growing more animated with each increase. Delia stared at the floor, her fingernails digging into her palms so deeply she drew blood. This couldn't be happening. Not in America. Not in 1878. Yet here she was, being sold to the highest bidder along with everything her father had worked his entire life to build. $1,200, shouted Hastings, a triumphant gleam in his eye as the room fell silent. He was the wealthiest man in the territory, and no one could match his offer, going once. Thornton began, his voice dripping with satisfaction, going twice. "I'll pay with my life instead." The voice that cut through the saloon was steady and deep. The crowd parted as a tall figure moved toward the front. Owen Westbrook stood before the platform, trail dust still clinging to his denim pants and leather vest. His face, partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, revealed piercing blue eyes that held Thornton's gaze without wavering. "What nonsense is this?" Thornton demanded, his jowls quivering with indignation. "Not nonsense," Owen replied, his voice carrying throughout the now silent room. "I'm offering something worth more than money. I'll work the Rose Ranch, protect the land and the lady, and serve as her guardian for as long as she needs. My life in exchange for hers." "This is an auction, Westbrook, not a charity," Thornton sneered. "We need cash to settle Thomas Rose's debts." "I have $800, Owen said, placing a leather pouch on the table. "Every cent I've saved in 10 years of driving cattle. I'll add my service and protection to make up the difference." "Your life ain't worth $400, cowboy," Hastings laughed, flashing a gold tooth. "The lady and her land are going to me." Delia, who had been silent throughout the proceeding, finally found her voice. "Do I have no say in this matter?" Her words were quiet but carried a strength that surprised even her. Thornton looked annoyed. "Your father's debts give you no standing, Miss Rose." "My father would never have allowed this," she countered, straightening her shoulders. "And I believe Mr. Westbrook's offer has merit." For the first time, she truly looked at the cowboy. She had seen him around town occasionally, a quiet man who kept to himself but was known for his honest dealings and skill with horses. He wasn't like the others in the room, salivating over her dowry and the prospect of claiming her as well. "I accept Mr. Westbrook's offer," she declared firmly. The saloon erupted in shouts of protest, with Hastings the loudest among them. "This is preposterous. I'm offering good money." Sheriff Miller, who had been watching from the corner, finally stepped forward. "Now, hold on. This whole proceeding is questionable at best." Thomas Rose was a friend of mine, and I don't recall him mentioning any arrangement that would allow his daughter to be auctioned off like this. Thornton's face reddened. The debts are legal and binding. I have the papers right here. He patted his vest pocket. Those papers give you claim to monetary compensation, not to the girl herself, the sheriff replied sternly. And if Mr. Westbrook is offering to work to clear those debts while protecting Miss Rose's interests, that seems a fair settlement to me. Delia descended from the platform, her legs barely supporting her weight. Owen offered his arm, which she gratefully accepted. "This ain't over," Hastings growled, jabbing a finger in Owen's direction. "That land should be mine." "The land belongs to Miss Rose," Owen replied calmly, though Delia could feel the tension in his arm. "And now, if you'll excuse us, I believe we have arrangements to discuss." He guided her through the crowd and out into the cool night air. For the first time since her father's death, Delia took a deep breath that wasn't heavy with despair. She had no idea what would come next or why this cowboy had placed himself between her and ruin. But in that moment, it was enough to be walking away from the auction block. "Thank you," she whispered as they reached the end of the boardwalk. Owen nodded, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. No decent man could stand by and watch what was happening in there. Your father was a good man. He deserves better than having his legacy torn apart by vultures. You knew my father. We crossed paths several times. I worked a cattle drive for him 2 summers ago. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Miss Rose, I meant what I said in there. I'll help you keep your land and get back on your feet. No strings attached. Delia studied him, searching for any hint of deception. Why would you do this? You've given up your savings and now you're offering your labor as well. Owen's eyes met hers steadily. Because it's right, and because I know what it's like to lose everything. Something in his tone told her not to press further, at least not tonight. I still have the house, she said instead. You're welcome to use the bunkhouse. That'll do fine. He glanced back toward the saloon where raised voices could still be heard. We should get you home. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. As they walked toward her waiting horse and wagon, Delia couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed irrevocably, perhaps for the better, perhaps not. But one thing was certain. She was no longer alone in her fight. The sun had barely crested the eastern hills when Delia awoke the next morning. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of activity outside, the chopping of wood, the nickering of horses, boots on gravel. Then reality rushed back. Her father was gone. She had nearly been sold at auction, and now a stranger had pledged his life to protect her and her land. She dressed quickly in a practical blue dress, twisted her chestnut hair into a simple knot, and went downstairs. Through the kitchen window, she could see Owen already at work, mending a section of the corral fence that had been broken for weeks. The coffee was fresh and hot. He must have started it before dawn, and a plate of biscuits sat on the table. Delia filled 2 cups and headed outside, drawing a deep breath of the crisp morning air that smelled of pine and sage. "Good morning, Mr. Westbrook," she called as she approached. Owen looked up, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "Miss Rose." He accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Hope I didn't wake you." "Not at all," she gestured to the fence. "You've been busy. Just getting started. Your father built a fine ranch, but there's plenty that needs attention." Delia sipped her coffee, studying him in the morning light. Owen Westbrook looked to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting against harsh sunlight. His dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and his beard was neatly trimmed. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him, yet she found herself inexplicably drawn to his quiet competence. "Mr. Westbrook." "Owen," he corrected gently. Owen, then, I need to understand exactly what happened last night, what it means for both of us. He set down his hammer and gave her his full attention. It means those vultures can't touch you or your land, at least not legally. I've given my word to help you get this place running properly again, and I will. At the cost of your freedom, she pointed out. You've essentially indentured yourself. A faint smile crossed his face. I've been a hired hand most of my life, Miss Rose. Working for a purpose beats drifting any day. Delia, she offered in return, if we're to be partners in this arrangement, formality seems unnecessary. He nodded, acknowledging the concession. As for the arrangement, I suggest we keep it simple. I'll work the ranch, you'll run the household. We'll present ourselves as business partners to the town. That should keep the gossips at bay, at least for a while. And the debts. Thornton wasn't lying about those. My father borrowed heavily this past year, though I never understood why. A shadow crossed Owen's face. Your father was being squeezed. Hastings wants this valley, and he's not particular about how he gets it. The drought last year gave him leverage. Delia frowned. You seem to know a lot about our situation. People talk. I listen. He finished his coffee and handed her the cup. How much did your father owe? Just over $1,000 to the bank and probably more to Thornton's mercantile. Owen nodded thoughtfully. The $800 I gave them should satisfy the bank for now. As for the rest, we have 300 head of cattle that should be ready for market by fall. If we can keep them healthy and get them to Helena, that should clear the remaining debts and leave enough to get through the winter. You make it sound so straightforward, Delia said, unable to keep the doubt from her voice. Not saying it will be easy, Owen replied. But it's possible. What other choice do we have? He was right, of course. Without his intervention, she would already be Hastings' unwilling bride or worse. This arrangement, unusual as it was, offered her a chance to save her father's legacy. There's something else you should know, she said after a moment. I'm not helpless. I can ride, shoot, and I know this ranch better than anyone. I don't need a protector as much as I need a partner. Owen studied her, and for the first time she saw genuine approval in his eyes. Good, because that's exactly what this place needs. Two people working together. A rider approached from the direction of town, interrupting their conversation. Owen tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his hip where a Colt revolver was holstered. It's just Sheriff Miller, Delia assured him, recognizing the distinctive white horse. The sheriff dismounted, touching his hat in greeting. Miss Rose, Westbrook. His weathered face was grave. Thought you should know Hastings is making noise about challenging last night's agreement. Says it wasn't binding. What do you think, Sheriff? Owen asked quietly. Miller sighed. Legally, it's murky. Morally, you did right. But Hastings has the territorial judge in his pocket, so if he pushes it. What would make it binding? Delia asked, a knot forming in her stomach. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Well, truth be told, if you two were married, it would be ironclad. A husband has legal right to protect his wife's property, and no one could contest it. The suggestion hung in the air between them. Delia felt her cheeks warm but kept her expression neutral. We appreciate the warning, Owen said, his tone giving nothing away. Anything else we should know? Just watch your backs. Hastings doesn't take defeat well. Miller mounted his horse. I'll do what I can to keep the peace, but my jurisdiction only extends so far. After the sheriff rode away, Delia and Owen stood in awkward silence. He's right, Owen finally said. Marriage would secure your position legally. I barely know you, Delia replied, though without heat, and I've never believed in marriage without. She stopped, embarrassed. Without love, he finished for her. That's as it should be. He picked up his hammer again. We'll find another way to protect your interests. Delia nodded, both relieved and strangely disappointed. I should see to the chickens and the garden. Previous arrangements notwithstanding, we still need to eat." As she walked away, she couldn't help glancing back. Owen had returned to his work, his movements sure and economical. She had no idea what had prompted him to step forward last night to offer his life for hers, but she was beginning to believe he was a man who kept his word. For now, that would have to be enough. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm that, while not comfortable, was at least predictable. Owen rose before dawn each day to tend to the essential morning chores before Delia was even awake. By the time she came downstairs, coffee would be brewed and he would be out working somewhere on the property, fixing fences, checking on cattle, repairing the barn roof that had leaked all winter. Delia, for her part, tended to the house, the kitchen garden, and the chickens. She also kept the books, a task her father had taught her years ago when her mother died. Each evening, she and Owen would sit at the kitchen table and discuss what had been accomplished and what remained to be done. They were cordial to each other, respectful of boundaries and privacy. Owen continued to sleep in the bunkhouse, taking his evening meals with her but retreating afterward. Sometimes, when the work allowed, they would ride out together to check the far pastures, and during those long rides, Delia began to learn more about the quiet cowboy who had saved her. "Where are you from originally?" she asked one afternoon as they rested their horses beside a small creek. Owen was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. "Pennsylvania originally," he finally said. "My father had a small farm there. What brought you west?" "The war." His expression grew distant. "After Gettysburg, there wasn't much left of our farm or my family." Delia felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry," he shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. "It was a long time ago. I was 16 when I headed west. Worked ranch jobs, drove cattle, did some scouting for the army. Never stayed in one place too long. Until now," she observed. His eyes met hers. "Until now." There was something in his gaze that made her heart beat faster, and she looked away, suddenly flustered. "We should head back." Clouds are building to the west. The storm caught them anyway, a sudden summer downpour that had them both soaked by the time they reached the ranch house. They stabled the horses quickly, then ran for the porch, laughing despite the chill. "You'd better change before you catch your death," Delia said, watching water drip from Owen's hat brim. "You too," he replied, but neither of them moved. They stood there on the porch, dripping and breathless, something unspoken passing between them. Delia became acutely aware of how her wet dress clung to her body, how close they were standing, how his eyes had darkened as they tracked a raindrop sliding down her neck. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching riders. Owen stepped back, his hand moving to his gun as he peered through the rain. "Hastings," he said grimly, recognizing the lead rider, "and some of his men." Delia's stomach tightened with apprehension. "What does he want?" "Nothing good." Owen's voice was hard. "Get inside, lock the door." "I'm not hiding in my own house," she protested. He gave her a look of exasperation mixed with reluctant admiration. "Then stay behind me." William Hastings reined his horse at the edge of the yard, flanked by 4 rough-looking men. Rain plastered his expensive suit to his corpulent frame, but his expression was one of smug confidence. "Afternoon, Miss Rose," he called, ignoring Owen completely. "Nasty weather we're having." "State your business, Hastings," Owen said coldly. Hastings finally acknowledged him with a contemptuous glance. "My business is with the lady, not her. Hired help." "Mr. Westbrook speaks for this ranch," Delia said firmly, stepping forward to stand beside Owen. "What do you want?" "Simply to make you a new offer, my dear. Things have changed since our last encounter." He produced an envelope from inside his coat. "The territorial judge has ruled that the—" unusual arrangement made at the auction was not legally binding. Your father's debts remain outstanding, and as primary creditor, I'm entitled to satisfaction." Owen's expression didn't change, but Delia felt him tense beside her. "Show me this ruling," he demanded. One of Hastings' men rode forward and handed over the envelope. Owen opened it, scanning the contents quickly, his face darkening. "This is a sham," he said, passing the paper to Delia. "Judge Carlton has no jurisdiction here." "He speaks for the territorial government," Hastings countered smugly. "But I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to forgive the debt entirely in exchange for marriage to Miss Rose. She'd want for nothing as my wife." "Except her freedom and dignity," Delia replied, her voice shaking with anger. "I declined your offer before, Mr. Hastings, and I decline it now." Hastings' false smile vanished. "Then I'll be forced to foreclose. You have 1 week to vacate the property." "We'll see about that," Owen said quietly. "Now get off this land before I remove you." Hastings laughed. 5 against 1, Westbrook, not good odds. I don't need odds." There was something in Owen's voice that made even Hastings pause, a calm certainty that spoke of a man who had faced worse and survived. After a tense moment, Hastings wheeled his horse around. 1 week, he repeated, then led his men away, back through the driving rain. Delia's hands were trembling as she reread the document. Can he do this? Take everything? Owen guided her inside, where they both stood dripping on the worn rug in the entryway. "Not if I can help it," he promised. "We need to get to town tomorrow, talk to the sheriff, and find out if this ruling is legitimate." "And if it is," her voice was small, vulnerable in a way she hated. Owen reached out hesitantly, then seemed to think better of it and let his hand drop. "Then we'll figure something else out. I made you a promise, Delia. I intend to keep it." For the first time since he'd made his dramatic offer in the saloon, Delia wondered exactly what that promise might cost him, and what it might cost her heart, which was beginning to respond to him in ways she hadn't expected. They rode into Silverwood Creek the following morning, tension evident in every line of their bodies. The town was bustling with its usual activity, freight wagons being loaded at the mercantile, cowboys lounging outside the saloon despite the early hour, women in calico dresses carrying market baskets. Delia was acutely aware of the stares they received. News traveled fast in small communities, and everyone would know about Hastings' visit by now. She held her head high, grateful for Owen's solid presence beside her as they made their way to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Miller was waiting for them, his expression grim. "Figured you'd be coming in today," he said, ushering them inside. "I heard about Hastings' visit." "Is this ruling legitimate?" Owen asked without preamble, producing the document. Miller examined it, then sighed heavily. "Technically, yes. Carlton's a circuit judge with territorial authority. But," he added, seeing their faces fall, "there are irregularities here. For one thing, a notice of hearing should have been posted, giving you a chance to present your case." "There was no notice," Delia confirmed. "That might give us grounds to challenge it," Miller said. "But it would take time, and Hastings knows it. He's counting on being able to take possession before you can mount a legal defense." "What about the original agreement?" Owen pressed. "I paid $800 and offered my service in exchange for clearing the debt." "Without a written contract, it's your word against theirs, and Thornton is backing Hastings' version of events." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "There is one sure way to protect Miss Rose's interests, as I mentioned before." "Marriage," Delia said flatly. Miller nodded. "As your husband, Westbrook would have legal authority to represent your interests and manage your property. Hastings couldn't touch it without going through him." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Delia stared at her gloved hands, her thoughts in turmoil. Marriage had always been a distant prospect in her mind, something that would happen someday, with someone she loved deeply. Not a business arrangement with a man she'd known for barely a month. "We need time to discuss this," Owen said finally. "Is there anything else we can do in the meantime?" "I can delay any action on Hastings' part for a few days, claim I need to verify the paperwork," Miller offered. "That might buy you till the end of the week." As they left the sheriff's office, Delia felt numb. The future she'd envisioned running her father's ranch, making it prosper again, seemed to be slipping away with each passing hour. "We should stop at the Mercantile before we head back," Owen suggested, breaking into her thoughts. "We're low on supplies." She nodded mechanically, following him down the dusty street. Inside Thornton's Mercantile, she moved through the familiar aisles, selecting items they needed: flour, coffee, salt, matches, while Owen spoke quietly with other ranchers near the front counter. As she reached for a bolt of fabric, a voice behind her made her freeze. "Such a shame about your predicament, Miss Rose." Augusta Thornton, the proprietor's wife, stood there with false sympathy plastered across her pinched features. A cluster of town women hovered nearby, not even pretending not to eavesdrop. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Thornton," Delia replied with as much dignity as she could muster. "Why, the foreclosure, of course. Everyone's talking about it." Augusta's eyes gleamed with malicious pleasure. "And that cowboy of yours. Quite the scandal. A young woman living alone with a hired hand. Of course, given your circumstances, I suppose propriety is a luxury you can't afford." Delia felt her cheeks burn, anger and humiliation warring within her. Before she could respond, Owen appeared at her side. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, his tone perfectly polite yet somehow carrying a warning. "Always a pleasure. If you'll excuse us, Miss Rose and I need to be getting back to the ranch. Cattle won't tend themselves." He placed their purchases on the counter, paid with cash despite Augustus Thornton's sniff of disapproval, and offered Delia his arm. She took it gratefully, feeling the solid strength of him as they walked out together. "Don't let them get to you," he said quietly as they mounted their horses. "People like the Thorntons feed on others' misfortunes." "It's not just that," she admitted as they rode out of town. "It's knowing they're right about one thing. I am scandalizing the town by living alone with you." Owen was silent for a long moment. Would it really be so terrible? He finally asked, "Being married to me?" The direct question caught her off guard. She studied his profile, the straight nose, the firm jaw, the eyes that had seen more than they revealed. In the weeks they'd worked together, she had come to respect his diligence, his quiet competence, his unfailing courtesy. There were certainly worse men to tie oneself to. "It's not about you," she said carefully. "It's about being forced into a decision I should be making freely in my own time." "I understand." His voice was gentle. "And I won't press you. But Delia," he added, using her given name in that way that always made her heart beat faster, "time is something we don't have much of right now." They rode the rest of the way in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The ranch came into view as the sun was beginning its westward slide, the weathered house with its wide porch, the red barn, the corrals and outbuildings, the sweeping pastures dotted with cattle. Her home, her legacy. Everything her father had worked for, everything she had dreamed of preserving. "I need to check the north pasture," Owen said as they dismounted in the yard. "I'll be back before dark." Delia nodded, watching him ride away, his straight back and broad shoulders silhouetted against the afternoon sky. Something twisted in her chest, not quite pain, not quite yearning, but a complicated mixture of both. Inside the house, she moved restlessly from room to room, touching familiar objects: her mother's china shepherdess on the mantel, her father's pipe still resting in its stand, the patchwork quilt her grandmother had made. The idea of Hastings or his men pawing through these treasures, claiming them as spoils, made her physically ill. By the time Owen returned, she had made up her mind. She was waiting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "It's beautiful tonight," he commented as he climbed the steps. "Yes," she took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what Sheriff Miller said." Owen went still, his eyes fixed on her face. And I believe he's right. Marriage is our best option." She forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "If you're still willing." "Are you certain?" His voice was careful, controlled. "This isn't a decision to make out of desperation." "I'm not desperate," she countered. "I'm practical. We work well together, we respect each other. And it solves our most pressing problem." "That's not how I imagined proposing," he said with a hint of wry humor. "Or being proposed to, for that matter." Despite everything, Delia felt a smile tugging at her lips. "I believe it's traditionally the gentleman who does the asking." Owen's expression softened. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. His palms were rough with calluses, warm and strong around her fingers. "Delia Rose," he said quietly, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not just to save your ranch, but because I believe we could build something good together." The sincerity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Yes," she whispered. "I will." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. It was not a passionate gesture, but somehow it affected her more deeply than any embrace could have. There was promise in it of respect, of care, perhaps someday of something more. "We'll ride to town tomorrow," he said. "Find the preacher." She nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. This was not the wedding she had dreamed of as a girl, not the love match she had hoped for. But as Owen released her hands and moved toward the bunkhouse, casting one last glance over his shoulder, she found herself wondering if perhaps fate had given her something she hadn't known to ask for. The church in Silverwood Creek was a simple white clapboard building with a modest steeple, set slightly apart from the more raucous establishments of the main street. Reverend Abernathy met them at the door, his kind face creased with concern when they explained the situation. "Marriage is a sacred covenant," he reminded them gently. "Not a business arrangement to be entered into lightly." "We understand that, Reverend," Delia assured him, dressed in her best blue dress, a small bunch of wildflowers clutched in her trembling hands. "But circumstances have forced our hand. We intend to honor our vows," Owen added. He looked different today, his usual work clothes replaced by a clean black suit that fit him surprisingly well. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. The Reverend studied them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Do you have witnesses?" Sheriff Miller had agreed to stand for them, and Mrs. Parker, the baker's wife who had always been kind to Delia, served as the second witness. The ceremony was brief and solemn, the traditional words echoing in the empty church. "I, Owen James Westbrook, take thee, Delia Catherine Rose, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I, Delia Catherine Rose, take thee, Owen James Westbrook, to be my lawfully wedded husband." When it came time for the ring, Owen produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. As he slid it onto Delia's finger, their eyes met, and something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the magnitude of what they were doing. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Abernathy intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Owen hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to hers. It was a chaste kiss, brief and proper, but Delia felt it like a current running through her body. Her first kiss, from a man who was now her husband in name if not yet in truth. Sheriff Miller shook Owen's hand vigorously. "I've taken the liberty of posting notice of your marriage at the courthouse and sending a copy to Judge Carlton," he said. "Hastings can bluster all he wants, but he can't touch the Rose property now." "Westbrook property," Owen corrected quietly, his eyes on Delia. "Or perhaps Westbrook Rose. That has a good sound to it." Mrs. Parker hugged Delia warmly. "Marriage is what you make it, dear," she whispered. "Sometimes the arranged ones turn out better than the love matches, once you get to know each other." They signed the marriage certificate, accepted the reverend's blessing, and stepped out into the bright summer day as husband and wife. Word had spread quickly. Townspeople paused to watch them emerge from the church, some offering congratulations, others whispering behind their hands. Augustus Thornton stood on the mercantile porch, his face mottled with anger. Beside him, William Hastings glared at them with undisguised hatred. "This changes nothing," Hastings called as they passed. "You've bought yourself time, nothing more." Owen's arm tightened protectively around Delia's waist. "Good day, gentlemen," he said calmly, helping her into the wagon they'd brought for the occasion. As they drove out of town, Delia felt a curious mixture of emotions: relief that her home was secure for now, apprehension about the night ahead, and a strange fluttering whenever she looked at the gold band on her finger or felt Owen's steady presence beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked, noticing her silence. "Yes," she replied, "just adjusting to being Mrs. Westbrook." He glanced at her, a smile warming his usually serious face. "You could keep your name if you prefer. Delia Rose has a fine ring to it." "Delia Westbrook has a nice sound too," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "I just need time to get used to it." They arrived back at the ranch by mid-afternoon. Owen helped her down from the wagon, then hesitated, clearly unsure of the protocol for this unusual situation. "I should see to the horses," he said finally. Delia nodded, relieved and disappointed in equal measure. "I'll start supper." They moved through the rest of the day in a state of heightened awareness of each other. Ordinary tasks, setting the table, passing the salt, washing dishes, took on new significance. Every accidental brush of hands or meeting of eyes carried weight. As dusk fell, the inevitable question could no longer be avoided. Owen stood awkwardly in the kitchen doorway as Delia finished putting away the last of the dishes. "I can continue using the bunkhouse," he offered, "if that would make you more comfortable." Delia turned to face him, summoning her courage. "That would hardly be appropriate. We're married now." "In name," he reminded her gently. "I made no assumptions about other aspects." The flush that rose to her cheeks felt like it might permanently stain her skin. "I understand what marriage entails, Owen." His eyes darkened. "Delia," he said, his voice rougher than she'd ever heard it, "I won't claim rights I haven't earned. When if you come to me that way, it will be because you want to, not because you feel obligated." The tenderness in his words moved her deeply. This man, who had already given so much to protect her, was now offering her the freedom to choose when or if they would truly become husband and wife. "Thank you," she whispered. "But I think we should try to make this a real marriage, in all ways." Owen crossed to her slowly, as if approaching a skittish colt. He raised one hand to cup her cheek, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, Delia rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. Unlike the brief, formal kiss in the church, this one lingered. After a moment of surprise, Owen responded, his arm sliding around her waist to draw her closer. The kiss deepened, and Delia felt herself melting against him, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, his chest. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing harder. "Upstairs," Owen suggested, His voice husky, Delia nodded, suddenly unable to speak. He took her hand and led her up the narrow staircase to her bedroom, their bedroom now. The lamp was already lit, casting a warm glow over the simple furnishings. With gentle hands, Owen helped her remove the pins from her hair, watching in fascination as the chestnut waves tumbled down her back. "Beautiful," he murmured, running his fingers through the silky strands. His tenderness gave her courage. Though her hands trembled, Delia reached for the buttons of his shirt, undoing them one by one. Owen stood perfectly still, letting her set the pace, his eyes never leaving her face. When she hesitated at his undershirt, he took over, pulling it over his head to reveal a chest hardened by years of physical labor, crisscrossed with old scars that spoke of a life she was only beginning to understand. Wordlessly, he turned her around to help with the buttons of her dress. His fingers were surprisingly dexterous as they worked their way down her spine, each newly exposed inch of skin seeming to heighten her awareness of him. The dress slipped from her shoulders, leaving her in her chemise and petticoats. Owen's breath caught audibly, and when she turned to face him again, the heat in his eyes made her feel both vulnerable and powerful. "You can still change your mind," he said hoarsely. "At any point." In answer, Delia reached for the ribbon at the neck of her chemise and slowly untied it. "I don't want to change my mind." What followed was a gentle education. Owen was a patient teacher, guiding her through the initial awkwardness and discomfort to a place of surprising pleasure. His hands and lips seemed to know instinctively how to touch her, where to linger, when to press forward. Afterward, lying in his arms as their breathing slowed, Delia felt a profound shift in her understanding of marriage. This wasn't just a legal arrangement to protect her property. It was a joining of two people in the most intimate way possible. "Are you all right?" Owen asked softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Yes," she whispered, and was surprised to find she meant it completely. "Better than all right," he chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear where it rested on his chest. "That's good to hear, Mrs. Westbrook." The name sent a shiver through her. "It still sounds strange. You'll get used to it." His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, "just like I'll get used to having a wife." "Have you never been married before?" She realized how little she knew about his past. "No." There was something in his tone that suggested more to the story, but he didn't elaborate. Delia propped herself up on one elbow to look at him in the dim light. "There must have been women before me." A shadow crossed his face. "Yes, but no one who mattered enough to stay for." The simple statement touched her deeply. Owen Westbrook was not a man of flowery words or grand romantic gestures, but in his quiet way he had just told her she was different, special. "Thank you," she said softly, "for staying." He pulled her back down to him, tucking her head beneath his chin. "Sleep now," he murmured. "Tomorrow comes early." As she drifted into sleep, Delia realized that for the first time since her father's death, she felt truly safe. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with this steady, honorable man at her side. And perhaps, in time, what had begun as a marriage of convenience might grow into something much more profound. The morning light filtered through the curtains, waking Delia from a deep, restful sleep. For a moment she lay still, aware of the unfamiliar weight of an arm draped across her waist, the warmth of another body beside hers. Owen, her husband. The events of the previous day rushed back: the hasty wedding, the tension-filled return to the ranch, the night that had transformed their relationship from a business arrangement to something far more intimate. Carefully, she turned to study his sleeping face. Relaxed in slumber, he looked younger, the usual vigilance smoothed away from his features. A faint scar bisected one eyebrow, and his dark lashes rested against sun-bronzed cheeks. Without thinking, She reached out to trace the line of his jaw, rough with morning stubble. Owen's eyes opened immediately, instantly alert in a way that spoke of years spent in situations where deep sleep could be dangerous. But when he saw her, his expression softened. "Good morning," he said, his voice husky with sleep. "Good morning," she echoed, suddenly shy despite what they had shared during the night. He seemed to sense her uncertainty and kept his distance, though his eyes warmed as they took in her tousled hair and flushed cheeks. "No regrets." "None," she assured him, and was surprised to discover it was true. What had happened between them felt right, as if they had always been moving toward this moment. Owen smiled a real smile that transformed his serious face and made her heart skip a beat. "Good." He leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Because I find I'm rather fond of being your husband." The simple declaration chased away her remaining nervousness. "And I'm beginning to enjoy being your wife." His expression grew heated, and he pulled her closer. "Perhaps I could convince you to enjoy it even more." The chores were very late getting started that morning. Over the next few weeks, they settled into a new routine. They still worked separately for much of the day, Owen with the cattle and the endless ranch repairs, Delia with the household and garden, but now their evenings and nights were shared. Conversation over supper flowed more easily, and they began to truly learn each other's histories, hopes, and habits. Owen, she discovered, had fought for the Union during the war, though he spoke of it reluctantly and only in the briefest terms. He had indeed lost his family parents and a younger sister when Confederate raiders burned their farm. After the war, he had drifted west, working as a cowhand, freight driver, and occasionally as a scout for the Army. "Is that how you got this?" Delia asked one evening, tracing a long, jagged scar that ran across his ribs. "Comanche arrow," he confirmed. "1872, near the Red River." "I was lucky. If it had been a few inches higher, we wouldn't be having this conversation." She shuddered at the thought. "You've lived a dangerous life." "Parts of it," he agreed, "but that's behind me now." Delia wasn't so sure. She had seen how Hastings looked at them in town, the barely suppressed fury in his eyes. The cattle baron was not a man to accept defeat gracefully, and she feared he was merely biding his time. Her fears proved well-founded when, 3 weeks after their wedding, they awoke to find 2 of their best breeding bulls dead in the pasture nearest the road, their throats cut during the night. Owen's expression was granite hard as he examined the carcasses. "This wasn't wolves or mountain lions," he said grimly. "This was deliberate." "Hastings?" Delia asked, though she already knew the answer. "Almost certainly, though we'll never prove it." Owen straightened, wiping his bloody hands on a bandana. "He's sending a message." "What do we do?" "We bury these poor beasts, tighten security, and go about our business." His jaw was set in a determined line. "If Hastings thinks he can scare us off with these tactics, he's misjudged his opponents." That night, Owen took the first watch, rifle in hand, patrolling the perimeter of their property until midnight when Delia relieved him. It was the beginning of a new pattern: constant vigilance, sleeping in shifts, always alert for the next attack. It came a week later, when their nearest waterhole was fouled with something that made the cattle sick. Then a section of fence was cut, allowing a dozen steers to wander onto Hastings' land, where they were promptly impounded with demands for exorbitant fees to recover them. Each incident was carefully calculated to inflict maximum damage while providing minimum evidence of wrongdoing. Sheriff Miller was sympathetic, but helpless. "Unless you catch them in the act, there's nothing I can do," he admitted when they reported the latest incident, a mysterious fire that had destroyed a small hay barn. The constant strain began to take its toll. Delia noticed that Owen was sleeping less, his expression growing grimmer with each new setback. She, too, felt the weight of constant worry, jumping at unexpected sounds and scanning the horizon whenever she ventured outside. Yet paradoxically, the adversity seemed to strengthen their bond. Each night, no matter how exhausted or discouraged they might be, they found comfort in each other's arms. What had begun as a practical arrangement was evolving into genuine affection, and Delia was beginning to acknowledge, at least to herself, that her feelings for Owen ran deeper than mere gratitude or physical attraction. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Owen broke a lengthy silence. "The cattle drive to Helena should leave in 2 weeks," he said. "That's our best chance to get enough money to clear the remaining debts and see us through the winter." Delia nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. "How long will you be gone? 3 weeks, give or take." He glanced down at her. "You'll be all right here." "I managed this ranch for months after my father fell ill," she reminded him. "I can handle things for a few weeks." Owen's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I know you're capable, that's not what worries me." "Hastings," she said, understanding immediately. "Yes, he's been escalating his harassment and with me gone. I'll be careful," she promised, "and I'm not defenseless." She patted the pocket of her apron where she now routinely carried a small derringer. Owen didn't look convinced. "Maybe I should hire some extra hands for the drive, leave a couple of men here with you." "We can't afford it," Delia said practically. "Not if we want to clear the debts. Besides, who would you trust? Half the drifters in this territory are in Hastings' pocket." He sighed, acknowledging the truth of her words. "I don't like leaving you alone." "I won't be completely alone. The Parkers said they'd check on me, and Sheriff Miller promised to ride by regularly." She turned to face him fully. "This drive is our best chance, Owen. We have to take it." He studied her face in the fading light, then nodded slowly. "All right, but promise me you'll be vigilant. Don't take any unnecessary risks." "I promise." She sealed the vow with a kiss that quickly deepened, their shared concern finding expression in passionate reassurance. Later, as they lay entwined in their bed, Owen propped himself on one elbow to look down at her. In the soft lamplight, his expression was unusually vulnerable. "Delia," he said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you before I go." Her heart quickened with apprehension. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "When I offered to pay for your freedom with my life, it wasn't just because I admired your father or believed in doing the right thing." "No." She whispered. "No." His fingers traced the curve of her cheek tenderly. "I'd seen you in town many times, watched you manage your father's affairs with such grace and strength. I'd admired you from afar for months, though I never thought I had anything to offer a woman like you." Delia stared at him in astonishment. "You never said anything." "What could I say? I was a drifter with nothing but a horse and saddle to my name. Your father was still alive then, and you were the daughter of a respected rancher." He smiled wryly. "But that night in the saloon, when I saw them treating you like property to be sold to the highest bidder, something in me couldn't stay silent." "So you offered your life," she said softly, "and got more than I ever dreamed possible." His eyes held hers intently. "Delia, I need you to know before I leave on this drive. What began as an arrangement has become the most important thing in my life. You are the most important person in my life." Though he didn't say the words directly, his meaning was unmistakable. Delia felt her eyes fill with tears. "Owen." "You don't have to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I just needed you to know how I feel in case—" "Don't," she interrupted, pressing her fingers to his lips. "Don't talk as if you might not come back, and don't think for a moment that I don't feel the same way." The look of wonder that spread across his face was worth any embarrassment her bold declaration might have caused. He gathered her close, his kisses speaking volumes that words could not express. As she drifted toward sleep in his arms, Delia allowed herself to believe that, despite their unusual beginning, they might have found something truly precious together. All they needed was to get through the next few weeks, get the cattle to market, clear the debts, and put an end to Hastings' schemes once and for all. But fate, she was learning, rarely made things that simple. The day of the cattle drive's departure dawned clear and cool, a hint of autumn crispness in the air. Delia had risen early to prepare a hearty breakfast for Owen, and the 4 hands he had hired to help with the drive, all experienced cowboys vouched for by other ranchers in the area. As they ate, Owen went over last-minute instructions for the journey, his manner calm and authoritative. It was a side of him Delia hadn't fully appreciated before the natural leader, respected by other men for his competence and fair dealing. "We'll push hard the first few days while the weather holds," he was saying. "With luck, we can make Helena in just over 2 weeks." The men nodded, shoveling down eggs and biscuits with the single-minded focus of those who knew it might be their last decent meal for some time. Delia moved around the table refilling coffee cups, trying to memorize every detail of the scene, the way the morning light caught the auburn highlights in Owen's dark hair, the sound of his voice, the quiet confidence in his movements. 3 weeks suddenly seemed an eternity to be apart from him. All too soon it was time. The cattle had already been gathered in the north pasture, ready to move out. The men mounted up, their pack-horses loaded with supplies for the journey. Owen lingered, drawing Delia aside for a private farewell. "Remember what we discussed," he said, his hands warm on her shoulders. "Stay alert. Keep the rifle by the door and that derringer in your pocket." "I will," she promised. "You focus on getting those cattle to market safely. We need every dollar they'll bring." He nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. 3 weeks, he said. "I'll be back before you know it. I'll be counting the days." She tried to keep her tone light, though her heart felt like lead in her chest. Owen pulled her into his arms then, heedless of the cowboys waiting nearby. His kiss was fierce and possessive, a claiming and a promise all at once. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "Never doubt that." Before she could respond, he released her and strode to his waiting horse. With a final tip of his hat, he led his men toward the pasture where 300 head of cattle awaited. Delia stood on the porch long after they had disappeared from view, the words she hadn't had time to say aloud echoing in her mind. "I love you too." The first few days of Owen's absence passed uneventfully. Delia kept busy with the endless work of the ranch, tending the chickens and garden, mending clothes, preserving the late summer vegetables for the coming winter. Each night she carefully locked doors and windows, the rifle propped beside her bed, but no trouble came. On the 4th day, Sheriff Miller rode out as promised to check on her. "Any problems?" he asked as they sat on the porch drinking coffee. "None," Delia replied. "It's almost too quiet." The sheriff's weathered face creased with concern. "Don't let your guard down. Hastings has been asking questions in town, wanting to know exactly when the cattle drive left, how many men went with it." "Why would he care about that?" "I'm not sure," Miller admitted, "but he's up to something. His foreman's been hiring extra men, rough types from outside the territory." Delia felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. "You think they might attack the drive?" "It's possible. Or they might be planning something here." The sheriff set down his cup with a decisive click. "I'm going to send a deputy to trail the drive, just in case, and I'll be checking on you more often." After he left, Delia found herself jumping at every sound: a branch scraping against the window, an owl hooting in the barn, the normal settling of the old house. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of Owen in danger, calling for help she couldn't provide. A week into Owen's absence, Delia was in the garden harvesting the last of the summer tomatoes when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Setting down her basket, she hurried to the porch where the rifle waited, her heart pounding. To her relief, it was Mrs. Parker, the baker's wife who had stood witness at their wedding. The plump, motherly woman dismounted with surprising agility, carrying a covered basket. "Thought you might appreciate some company and fresh bread," she called cheerfully. "Tom's minding the bakery, so I can stay a while if you'd like." "I'd like that very much," Delia admitted, setting aside the rifle and embracing her friend. They spent a pleasant afternoon together, Mrs. Parker helping with the canning while regaling Delia with town gossip. It was only as she was preparing to leave that the older woman's expression grew serious. "You should know," she said quietly. "There's talk in town about Hastings. He's been drinking heavily at the saloon, making threats against you and that upstart cowboy of yours." Delia's stomach clenched. "What kind of threats?" "Nothing specific. But Martha Jenkins, she cleans at the hotel, overheard him talking with some men about teaching you both a lesson." Mrs. Parker patted Delia's hand. "Just be careful, dear, and know that you have friends in town. If you need anything at all, send word." That night, Delia double-checked every lock, then wedged chairs under the doorknobs for good measure. She loaded both the rifle and the derringer, placing them within easy reach of the bed. Despite her precautions, sleep eluded her. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind seemed magnified in the darkness. Around midnight, she gave up and lit a lamp, taking out a piece of mending to occupy her hands if not her mind. The shot, when it came, was so unexpected that for a moment she thought she'd imagined it. Then came another, and another, the distinctive crack of rifle fire from the direction of the barn. Heart hammering, Delia grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, staying carefully to one side as she peered out. In the pale moonlight, she could make out several figures moving around the barn. As she watched, a flicker of orange light appeared, flames licking at the barn door. They were burning her barn. With her horses inside, cold determination replaced fear. Keeping low, she moved to the back door, checked that the yard appeared empty, then slipped outside. Using the shadows of the outbuildings for cover, she made her way toward the well where a bucket and rope waited. Before she could reach it, a figure loomed out of the darkness. Well, Mrs. Westbrook, all alone. Delia raised the rifle, but too late. A hard blow knocked it from her hands, and rough arms grabbed her from behind. She fought wildly, kicking and clawing, but her captor was too strong. "Hastings wants to see you," grunted the man holding her. "Says you and him need to have a conversation about property rights. Let me go." She managed to land a solid kick to his shin, earning a curse and a painful tightening of his grip. "The boss said to bring you gentle, like if possible," the man growled in her ear. "But he didn't say you couldn't be a little bruised." The threat was clear. Delia forced herself to stop struggling, conserving her strength. "At least let me free the horses," she pleaded. "They haven't done anything to deserve burning alive." Her captor hesitated, then nodded to one of his companions. "Let the horses out. Hastings wants the place burned, not the livestock killed. He'll want to claim them after." The other man moved toward the barn, opening the doors to release the panicked horses inside. As they scattered into the night, Delia felt a small measure of relief. At least something had been saved. "Now, you're coming with us," her captor said, dragging her toward waiting horses. "The boss is real eager to discuss your husband's trespassing on his property." "What are you talking about?" Delia demanded as she was roughly hoisted onto a horse, her hands bound to the saddle horn. The man chuckled nastily. "Seems your cattle drive took a wrong turn, ended up crossing a corner of Hastings' land. That's rustling, according to the boss, punishable by hanging." Delia's blood ran cold. That's a lie. Owen would never save it for the boss, lady. The man mounted his own horse and took the reins of hers. He's got plans for you and that cowboy of yours. As they rode away, Delia looked back to see her home engulfed in flames, the fire spreading from the barn to the house. Everything she and Owen had worked for, everything her father had built, was being reduced to ashes. But it was the thought of Owen, possibly already in Hastings' hands, that filled her with real terror. She had to find a way to warn him, to save him if it wasn't already too late. The ride to Hastings' ranch was a nightmare of jostling pain and mounting fear. Delia's captors set a punishing pace, clearly under orders to reach their destination before dawn. Her bound hands cramped painfully, and every bounce in the saddle sent jolts of agony through her bruised body. But physical discomfort was nothing compared to the dread that filled her as she contemplated what might await at journey's end. If Hastings truly had intercepted the cattle drive, if Owen was already his prisoner, she forced the thought away. Owen was too smart, too experienced to be caught easily. And even if Hastings had sent men after the drive, they would be outnumbered by Owen and his hired hands, unless they had been ambushed while sleeping, unless Hastings had sent enough men to overwhelm them. Dawn was breaking as they crested a rise, and the Hastings ranch came into view. Unlike her own modest homestead, this was a sprawling operation, a large main house built of stone and timber, numerous outbuildings, extensive corrals and bunkhouses for the many hands employed by the cattle baron. They rode directly to the main house, where Delia was roughly pulled from her horse and marched inside. Her legs, stiff from the long ride, nearly buckled beneath her, but she forced herself to walk steadily. She would not show weakness before William Hastings. The man himself awaited in what appeared to be his study, a large room dominated by a massive desk and adorned with mounted animal heads. Hastings sat behind the desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand, despite the early hour. He looked up as she was brought in, his fleshy face spreading in a smile that made her skin crawl. "Mrs. Westbrook," he said, rising to his feet, "how kind of you to accept my invitation." "Kidnapping is hardly an invitation," Delia replied coldly, wrenching her arm free from her captor's grasp. "Where is my husband?" Hastings chuckled. "Direct as always, one of your many charms." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her wish for the Derringer that had been taken from her. "Your husband, as far as I know, is still happily driving your cattle toward Helena. Though by now he may have discovered they're a few heads short." Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by suspicion. "You said he was trespassing on your land, that you were going to hang him for rustling." "Did I?" Hastings glanced at the man who had brought her in. "Simmons has a tendency to embellish, but it's an excellent suggestion." He came around the desk, moving with surprising grace for a man of his bulk. "Your husband has been a thorn in my side, Mrs. Westbrook, taking what should have been mine." "I was never yours to take," Delia snapped. "No." He moved closer, his breath sour with whiskey. "Your father and I had an understanding. Before he died, he agreed to settle his debts by giving me your hand in marriage. That cowboy of yours interfered with a legitimate business arrangement." Delia stepped back, her spine connecting with a bookcase. "My father would never have promised me to you. He knew what kind of man you are. The kind who gets what he wants," Hastings said, his voice hardening. "The kind who doesn't tolerate interference." He reached out to touch her face, and Delia jerked away. "I'm offering you a choice, my dear. A chance to save your husband's life." "What kind of choice?" she asked warily. "Simple. Annul your marriage to Westbrook. Sign the Rose property over to me. In exchange, I'll let him live." Hastings smiled thinly. "He won't have you or the ranch, but he'll have his life. Seems fair, doesn't it?" And if I refuse, his smile vanished. Then when he returns from the cattle drive, assuming he makes it that far, he'll find his wife missing and his home in ashes. Naturally, he'll come looking for you. When he does. Hastings drew a finger across his throat in a gesture that needed no interpretation. Delia's mind raced. If Owen was still with the cattle drive, still safe, she needed to keep him that way. But signing over the ranch, dissolving their marriage, it was unthinkable. I need time to consider, she said, playing for time. Hastings laughed. Do you think me a fool? There's nothing to consider. You'll sign the papers now or your husband dies. It's that simple. You expect me to trust that you'll keep your word after you've burned my home and had me kidnapped. Trust has nothing to do with it. He moved to his desk and rang a small bell. The door opened and a man in a black suit entered, carrying a leather portfolio. Mr. Drake is my lawyer. He has prepared all the necessary documents. You will sign them and they will be filed with the territorial court today. Delia glanced at the lawyer, hoping for some sign of humanity, but Drake's face remained impassive. He was a tool, nothing more. And if I sign, she asked, still stalling, what happens to me? Hastings' smile returned, sending chills down her spine. Why, you'll remain here as my guest until the annulment is finalized. Then we can proceed with our original arrangement. You'll become Mrs. Hastings with all the privileges that entails. The thought made her physically ill, but she forced herself to maintain a neutral expression. I want your word in writing that no harm will come to Owen Westbrook, ever. Of course, Hastings agreed too readily. Drake, add a clause to that effect. As the lawyer began writing, Delia frantically considered her options. Signing would buy Owen's safety, at least temporarily. Not signing would surely put him in immediate danger when he returned. If she could just delay, find a way to warn him. I'll need to read the documents carefully, she said. And I'm exhausted from the journey. Perhaps after I've rested, now, Hastings insisted, his tone brooking no argument. You'll sign now, or I'll send men to intercept that cattle drive and bring me Westbrook's head. The lawyer finished writing and slid the documents across the desk toward her. With trembling fingers, Delia picked up the pen he offered. Forgive me, Owen, she thought as she signed her name to the first page. As she worked her way through the stack of legal papers, a commotion arose outside, shouting, the sound of running feet, then a gunshot. Hastings strode to the window. What the devil? The door burst open and one of his men rushed in. Boss, we've got trouble. Sheriff Miller's here with a posse demanding to see Mrs. Westbrook. Hope surged through Delia. The sheriff must have seen the fire, realized what had happened. Hastings cursed viciously. Stall them. Say she's not here. Too late for that, came a new voice. Sheriff Miller himself, standing in the doorway with his revolver drawn. Behind him were several men, all armed. Mrs. Westbrook, are you all right? She's fine, Hastings blustered. She came here of her own free will after some unfortunate accident at her ranch. Is that so? Miller looked to Delia. That's not what your hired hands told us when we caught them setting fire to the Rose property. They were quite talkative once we persuaded them. Delia straightened her shoulders, finding new strength. Mr. Hastings had me kidnapped, Sheriff. He was forcing me to sign over my property and annul my marriage under threat of harm to my husband. Lies, Hastings sputtered. She came to me for protection after her house caught fire. These documents are perfectly legal and signed under duress, Miller finished, which makes them worth less than the paper they're written on. He gestured to two of his deputies. William Hastings, you're under arrest for kidnapping, arson, and attempted extortion. As the deputies moved forward, Hastings lunged suddenly toward his desk drawer. There was a flash of metal as he pulled out a Derringer, Delia's own. She realized with a jolt and aimed it directly at her. "Nobody moves," he snarled, "or the lady dies right here." Everything seemed to slow down. Delia saw Sheriff Miller's finger tightening on his trigger, saw Hastings' hand trembling as he pointed the small gun at her, saw the lawyer Drake diving for cover beneath the desk. Then another shot rang out, not from the sheriff, not from Hastings, but from the window behind the desk. Hastings jerked, a look of surprise crossing his face as a red stain blossomed on his chest. The derringer slipped from his fingers as he collapsed. In the stunned silence that followed, a familiar voice called from outside. "Delia, are you all right?" "Owen," she gasped, rushing to the window. And there he was, still mounted on his horse, rifle in hand, his face a mask of concern and fury. Behind him were his hired hands from the cattle drive, all armed and looking ready for a fight. "I'm fine," she called back, tears of relief springing to her eyes. "How did you got word from a friend that Hastings was planning something?" he explained grimly. "We drove the cattle straight through to Helena, sold them in record time, and rode back as fast as we could, met the sheriff on the road." As deputies swarmed into the room to secure Hastings, who was wounded but still alive, Delia rushed outside and into Owen's arms. He dismounted just in time to catch her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, but she didn't care. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured into her hair. "When we saw the smoke from your ranch." "It can be rebuilt," she said, drawing back to look at his face, drinking in the sight of him. "All that matters is that you're safe." His eyes darkened with emotion. "No, Delia, all that matters is that we're both safe, together." And there, in the chaotic aftermath of violence, with the law taking charge and the future still uncertain, Owen Westbrook kissed his wife with all the passion and relief of a man who had nearly lost everything he valued. "I love you," Delia whispered against his lips, finally saying the words she hadn't had time to say before he left. "I love you so much." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Then we have everything we need." The weeks that followed were filled with hard work and new beginnings. The ranch house had been severely damaged by the fire, but the stone foundation remained sound, and with the help of neighbors and friends from town, rebuilding began immediately. Sheriff Miller had been as good as his word. Hastings survived his wound only to face multiple charges. With testimony from his own men, who were eager to save themselves, his conviction was all but certain. His assets were frozen pending the outcome of the trial, ensuring he could cause no further trouble regardless of the verdict. The cattle drive had been even more successful than they had hoped. The high prices in Helena had brought enough money to clear all outstanding debts and provide a substantial sum for rebuilding and restocking. As fall gave way to winter, Delia and Owen moved into their newly reconstructed home. It was different from the house she had grown up in, smaller for now, but designed to expand as their family grew. Owen had insisted on large windows to let in plenty of light, and a wider porch where they could sit together in the evenings. On a crisp December evening, with snow falling gently outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, they celebrated their first Christmas together. The house smelled of pine boughs and fresh, baked bread, and a small table in the corner held the few gifts they could afford to exchange. "I have something for you," Owen said, reaching into his pocket. "It's not much, but—" He placed a small, crudely wrapped package in her hands. Delia unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "It was my mother's," Owen explained. "The only thing I saved when I left Pennsylvania. I've carried it all these years, waiting for the right person to give it to." Tears pricked at Delia's eyes as she opened the locket. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of a woman with Owen's eyes and smile. She was beautiful. "She would have loved you," he said softly, "almost as much as I do." Delia closed her hand around the precious gift. "I have something for you too, something I can't wrap." Owen raised an eyebrow questioningly. "We're going to have a baby," she said, her voice trembling with joy and nervousness. "In the summer." For a moment he simply stared at her, shock written across his features. Then a smile broke across his face, so radiant it took her breath away. "A baby," he whispered, reaching out to place a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." Delia nodded, covering his hand with hers. "Our baby, the beginning of our family." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "When I stepped into that saloon all those months ago," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I never imagined it would lead to this. I only knew I couldn't stand by and watch you be sold like property." "You offered to pay with your life," she reminded him. "And instead I found a reason to truly live." He kissed her tenderly. "I love you, Delia Westbrook, more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you, Owen Westbrook." She smiled up at him. "My husband, my partner, the father of my child." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the rebuilt ranch in a blanket of pristine white. Inside, by the warmth of the fire, a man who had once offered his life as payment held in his arms the woman and unborn child who had become his reason for living. What had begun as an auction had become a love story. What had started as a business arrangement had blossomed into a marriage of true minds and hearts. And what had once been a lonely drifter and a desperate young woman were now a family, bound together by choice and love, and the promise of a future brighter than either could have imagined. As the new year approached, bringing with it the hope of new beginnings, Delia and Owen faced it together, stronger for the trials they had endured, richer for the love they had found, and certain that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them side by side. For Owen had indeed paid with his life, not by losing it, but by dedicating it to the woman he loved. And in doing so, he had gained everything that truly mattered. The years that followed brought both joys and sorrows, as all years do. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Delia's father, arrived on a warm June day, strong and healthy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Sarah Catherine, with copper curls and a laugh that could brighten the darkest day. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Owen's skill with cattle and horses combined with Delia's head for business proved a formidable combination. They added more land, more cattle, better breeding stock. The Westbrook Rose brand became known throughout the territory for quality and fair dealing. William Hastings was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, though he served only 5 before dying of pneumonia. His empire was divided and sold, much of it to smaller ranchers who had previously struggled under his domination. The balance of power in the valley shifted, becoming more equitable, more sustainable. Sheriff Miller eventually retired, but not before standing as godfather to young Thomas. Mrs. Parker continued to be a dear friend, teaching Delia the secrets of her famous bread and doting on the children as if they were her own grandchildren. There were hard times, of course. A particularly severe winter in 1884 nearly devastated their herd. A drought, 3 years later, threatened their crops and water supply. And when Sarah was 7, she fell ill with scarlet fever, hovering between life and death for nearly 2 weeks while her parents took turns at her bedside, praying for a miracle that ultimately came in the form of a slow but steady recovery. Through it all, the foundation of their life remained the unusual bond that had formed between them, forged in crisis, strengthened by shared purpose, and deepened by a love that grew richer with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Owen surprised Delia with a proper gold wedding band to replace the simple one he had placed on her finger in that hasty ceremony. It was inscribed inside with the words, "I'll pay with my life," a reminder of the pledge that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" Delia asked as they sat on their porch that evening, watching their children play in the twilight. "Offering yourself that night in the saloon." Owen's hand found hers, his thumb tracing the new ring on her finger. "Not for a single moment," he replied. "Best bargain I ever made." Even with all the trouble that followed, the fire, Hastings, everything we went through, he turned to look at her, his face lined now with a decade of Montana weather and parenthood, but his eyes still as clear and direct as the day they met. "Delia, when I said I'd pay with my life, I didn't realize I was getting the better end of the deal. Every day with you and those children is payment to me, not from me." She leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. Who would have thought an auction could lead to this? "Not me," he admitted with a chuckle. "I just knew I couldn't let them sell you like a prize heifer." "My hero," she teased gently, though the words held genuine gratitude. As the children ran up onto the porch, breathless from their game, Owen gathered them close, one arm still around Delia. "No," he said softly, "just a man who recognized something worth everything when he saw it." Thomas squirmed free, always in motion at 8 years old. "Pa, tell us the story again, about how you rescued Ma from the auction." "Yes, please, Papa," echoed Sarah, climbing into his lap with the unquestioning confidence of a child who has never known anything but love and security. Owen met Delia's eyes over their daughter's head, a silent communication born of years together. "Well," he began, settling back in his chair, "it was a summer night in 1878, and your mother was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen." As he recounted the tale somewhat sanitized for young ears, Delia watched her family, marveling at how life's most difficult moments could lead to its greatest blessings. From that terrible night when she'd stood trembling on an auction block, facing a future not of her choosing, had come this a home filled with love, children who would never know the fear she had known, and a husband who had truly given his life, not by losing it, but by sharing it fully with her. Outside, the Montana sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, a fitting backdrop to their story. Inside the circle of her family, Delia Rose Westbrook knew a contentment that could never be bought or sold, only freely given, freely received, and treasured beyond all price. And when the children were finally asleep, and she and Owen retired to their bedroom, his kiss still held the same wonder as it had on their wedding night. His hands, now calloused from years of honest work, still touched her with the same reverence. And when he whispered, "I love you," against her skin, she knew it for the most valuable currency in the world, worth more than any dowry, more precious than any gold. In the end, a man who had offered to pay with his life had instead been given a life worth living. And a woman who had nearly been sold to the highest bidder had found something no money could ever buy. It was, they both agreed in quiet moments of reflection, the best bargain either of them could have made.